Hello and welcome to the SAT 123 prep course. Today we're going to be going over the heart of algebra, which makes up 200 points on your math SAT. It's really important. So we're going to go over every possible question that they can ask about this topic in order to guarantee these 200 extra points to you on the SAT. So these questions mainly test your ability to conceptualize and create equations and according to real world problems. So basically, if you have an imagination and you can visualize these problems, you'll be good. So today we're going to be going over 14 unique questions that totally sums up the overall topic of the heart of algebra. These 14 questions go into 4 different topics. So just click here if you want to see to take the test or to do the questions beforehand. And I'm going to be leaving time links in the description or on screen so that you can skip ahead to the questions that you don't understand or get wrong. So go ahead. So another thing that I forgot to mention is that I'm going to be adding an extra worksheet of questions that are related to the topics that we're going over in this video. And just for extra practice, if you want to make sure that you've mastered the subject, go ahead and take it. I'm going to be linking that also in the description. So yeah. The first thing to do whenever approaching an SAT problem is to circle and underline important information, because oftentimes there's one specific piece of information that throws you off and changes the question entirely. So let's try to put this strategy into use. So in 2014, country X had 783 miles of paved roads. Starting in 2015, the country has been holding 8 miles of new roads each year. At this rate, how many miles of paved road will country X have in 2030? Assume that no paved roads go out of service. So what this problem is saying is that in 2014, 783 miles of roads are already created. And starting in 2015, they start making new roads, which means that by the end of 2015, they would have added 8 more roads. So this is a basic linear equation where you have 783 as your y-intercept and 8 as your slope. So if we go back to what the question is asking, it's asking how many roads will country X have in 2030? In order to do that, we need to find how many years after 2014 passes. A common mistake that is done is that they find the difference between 2030 and 2015, since the problem says that it all starts in 2015. However, that's wrong, because if you look at it through the perspective of a line, in 2014 they have 783 miles of road, right? And they start in 2015, which means that by the end of 2015 they would have added 8 roads, which shows how n means years after 2014, not 15. So now that we know what n represents, we can find the difference between 2030 and 2014 to find how many years after 2014 has passed, and we get 16. So once we do that, we can just plug 16 into the equation, which gives us a total of 911. So for the last thing, we just have to conceptualize what this value means. And the equation that we wrote was to find the amount of years in 2030, and that was our answer. So we're going to continue to use the same strategy of underlining and circling important information. So in 2014, country X had 783 miles of paved roads. Starting in 2015, the country has been building 8 miles of new paved road each year. At this rate, in which year will country X have at least 1,000 miles of paved roads? Assume that no paved roads go out of service. So this question is similar to the other ones. However, for this one, it's asking you to find the value of X for their inputted value of Y. So we can use the same equation that we used in the last one. And if you want to find out how to derive that equation, just go back to example 1. So with this equation, you know that Y represents the total number of roads after the n amount of years after 2014, right? So since they give you the amount of miles after the amount of years, you could just plug in 1,000 straight into the equation and use algebra to solve for the value of n, which represents the amount of years after 2014. Right here, a lot of people would solve and get that n is equal to 27 and just put that in as an answer choice. However, we have to reflect back to what the question is actually asking, and that's what year will it be? So We know that n is years after 2014, which means that we have to take 2014 and add 27.125 to it, which gives us a total of 2041.125. Another common mistake is that people would round down rather than round up because it's a lot closer to 21 than it is to 22. However, if you put in 2047, you will be you won't be answering the question, because the question is asking what year will they reach at least 1,000 miles of road, and in 2047 they haven't reached it, so you have to round up, making 2042 your answer. To edit a manuscript, Miguel charges $50 for the first 2 hours and $20 per hour after the first 2 hours. Which of the following expresses the amount C in dollars Miguel charges if it takes him X hours to edit a manuscript where X is greater than 2? So what we have to do is we have to realize that the words for the first is a constant value, which means that it doesn't change and it's your y-intercept. And the words per hour means that it's your slope, because it's constantly changing every hour. So we can come up with the equation 20x plus 50. But from here, this is kind of wrong, because for the first 2 hours at x equals 2, you should have 0 put in from the hourly pay, because she doesn't pay for hourly until after 2 hours. So when x is equal to 2, 20 should equal, the slope should equal 0. So we can do that by saying 20 parentheses x minus 2, because when you plug in 2, you get 0. But now we need to kind of distribute, right? So when we distribute that, we get 20x minus 40 plus 50. And that accounts for the first 2 hours, because for the first 2 hours he doesn't get paid, so we subtract 40 and we get an answer as 20x plus 10. A builder uses the function g, defined by g of x equals 80x plus 10,000, to estimate the cost g of x in dollars to build a one-story home of planned floor area of x square feet. So whenever we're reading a question, we always want to write down the variables first, so that we can kind of contextualize how they're all related. So x is square feet, and g of x is the total cost of a home, and that's dependent obviously on the amount of square feet the house is. So if he wants to build a $106,000 home, what is the planned floor area in square feet? So basically, you have to understand that they're asking you to solve for x. And they gave you the equation, so all you really have to do is plug in 106,000 into g of x, because that's the cost of the home. And then you solve. So first, you're going to want to subtract by 10,000 on both sides to get 80x on its own. You're going to get 96,000. And then from there, you just divide by 80, and you get your answer that x is equal to 1,200. Maiza bought a pair of pants and a briefcase at a department store. The sum of the prices of the pants and the briefcase before sales tax was $130. There was no sales tax on the pants and a 9% sales tax on the briefcase. The total Maiza paid, including the sales tax, was $136.75. What was the price in dollars of the pants? So when approaching this question, you always want to write down your variables and what you know. So you know that P plus B is equal to 130, because the pants and the briefcase before tax total to $130. And you know that when you add 9% more onto the value of the briefcase, you get to 136.75. So here you can create a system of equations. There are actually 2 methods to do this problem, but I'm going to go over the first one. Basically, you just cross out the values, one of the values, either P or B. P is the most easiest to cross out, so we're just going to multiply the top equation, P plus B equals 130, by -1, and we're going to combine the 2 equations. And when we multiply by -1, we're going to be left with 0.09B is equal to 6.75, and from there we just solve for B by dividing by 0.09, and we get that the briefcases are worth $75. And now that we know that B, we have to go back to the question, and it's asking for the price of the pants, right? So we plug that back into the equation, and we solve for the value of p, and we get that p is equal to 55. Each morning, John jogs 6 miles per hour and rides a bike at 12 miles per hour. His goal is to jog and ride his bike a total of at least 9 miles in no more than 1 hour. If John jogs J miles and rides his bike B miles, which of the following systems of inequalities represents John's goal? So, first, we have to write what we know, just as we always do with our variables. So, the most simple thing that we know is that J, the amount of miles that he jogs, plus B, the amount of miles that he runs, has to equal at least 9 miles. So J plus B has to be greater than or equal to 9, right? So the other part of this equation, so from there we can already eliminate choices B and C since they don't have this equation set up correctly. The other part gets a little bit more complicated because for however many miles he runs jogging or biking, he cannot run or bike more than 1 hour. So, in order to solve this, we have to know how many miles he has to run in order for 1 hour to pass, right? So for J, this means that for 1 mile, 1/6 of an hour passes, right? But for biking, 1 mile, 1/12 of an hour passes, right? So this means that however many miles that he runs either jogging or running, the sum of these two variables has to be less than or equal to 1, since they show the amount of miles or the amount of hours per mile. And if you look back to the answer choices, the equation that we just made is answer A. So this example tests your ability to kind of create equations from word problems and just, being able to understand relationships. What is the solution to the given equation? So whenever solving these types of problems, you always want to write out the equation and expand what you can. And it's going to simplify a lot of things to you. And once we expand, we get 3 over 2 minus 3y is equal to 3 over 5 plus 18y, right? And we kind of just want to isolate the y's, so we put them all to one side. And we also want to put all the regular numbers onto one side, so we subtract 3 over 5. So after this, we're left with 3 over 2 minus 3 over 5 is equal to 18y, right? So in this situation, you could either make the denominators equal. However, I know that if I multiplied this entire equation by 10, the numerators on both equations would become divisible. So I do that. Then I get 15 minus 6 is equal to 180y. 15 minus 6 is 9. And when I do 9 divided by 180, I know that 9 goes into 180 20 times. So I just do 1 over 20 is equal to y. And that's your answer. What is the solution to the given equation? So whenever approaching these type of problems, you always want to distribute as much as you can and then just go on and solve from there. So once you distribute, you're going to want to put everything onto one side. So for example, we're going to want to take this negative 9x and just add it. And from there you just solve. And finally you get your answer that x is equal to 0.8. So this type of question just tests your basic ability to solve algebraic problems. What is the solution xy to the system of equations above? So these types of problems, there's two ways to solve this type of problem. You could either cross out or you could substitute. So for the first example, we're going to cross out because it's more universal. And basically, when you're crossing out anything, you always want to distribute. That's usually the first step. So when we distribute 2 to 2y plus 3, we get 4y plus 6 is equal to 3x minus 5, right? And from there, we're going to want to put the two equations side by side. And you can see that if we subtract 4y to one side, it goes onto the other and cancels out with the 4y of the other equation. So when we combine these, the 4y's kind of cancel out. And we're left with 6 is equal to 5x plus 1. And from here, we just subtract 1, and we get that. And when we divide by 5, we get that x is equal to 1. So from there, we can go up, and we can immediately cross out c and d, because the x is not equal to 1. But in order to find the y value, we have to plug in x to the equation once again. So we get negative 2 times 1, which is negative 2, is equal to 4y plus 6. And you can either solve this algebraically or intuitively. What number in the answer choices is going to multiply by 4 added to 6 and still equal negative 2? And you know that negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. Negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2, which means that B is your answer choice. How many solutions xy does the system of equations have? So when it comes to determining how many solutions or whatever, you want to kind of imagine it. And what I find the easiest way to imagine it is when you put it into y equals mx plus b format. So when you do that, you get that 2y is equal to negative 6x plus 3. You divide by 2. And you get that y is equal to negative 3 plus 3 over 2, right? So from there, you know that your slope is negative 3 and that your y-intercept is 3 over 2. If we look back at the answer choices, we know that it also can't be c because that requires a parabola, and straight lines can only have one intersection. So if we find the y equals mx plus b format of the other one, we find that it has a negative 3 slope as well. And this means that if they have equal slope, they're parallel lines. And as you can see here, parallel lines, they never really touch, especially if they have different y-intercepts. However, if the y-intercepts were the same, the answer would be D. So watch out for that, because if they overlap, every point is a solution. In the system of equations above, a and b are constants. If the system has infinitely many solutions, what is the value of a? So this is kind of a third value problem. And whenever you're finding a third value, you want to make sure that both equations are the same, everything except everything involving the third variable. So first, we're just going to write out our equations in order to find what we can do to make them similar. So we know that a and b are constants, right? So since a is on its own, we know that according to a line could be the y-intercept, right? And bt is most likely the slope of the line, right? So we can treat 3s and 15s as if they're the y values, right? And in order to have equations equal, we had to have them on the same y values. So from there, we know that we had to multiply 3 by 5 in order to get 15. And if the y's are equal, then that means that the two equations should also be equal. So now that we know that these two equations should be equal, what value of a would make 5 equal to 7, right? Since these two have to be equal for these two equations to be equal. So you can think of it as like 5 divided by 5 is equal to 1, times 7 will equal 7. Or you could just think of it algebraically, and 5a is equal to 7 divided by 5. And your answer is 7 over 5. The graph of line K is shown in the xy plane above. Which of the following is an equation of a line that is perpendicular to line K? So whenever looking at anything that is perpendicular to anything, you first have to determine what the slope is, right? And you can literally just find slope since they give you the equation, since they give you the graph, by literally counting down 2 and counting to the right 1. So that shows you have a negative 2 slope. If not, you can use the y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, rise over run equation. It would be good to know that. So now that you know the slope, right, you know that the slope is negative 2x, you have to just remember that whenever finding a perpendicular line, you have to find the opposite reciprocal line. That means that you have to multiply the slope by negative 1 and then just flip it. So when you flip negative 2, you get first you get 1 over 2, negative 1 over 2x, and then when you make the negative of that, you get 1 over 2. And the only answer choice with that answer is C, which makes C your answer. A voter registration drive was held in town Y. The number of voters V registered T days after the drive began can be estimated by the equation V equals 3,450 plus 65T. What is the best interpretation of the number 65 in this context? So, you know that 65, right? It's accompanied by a variable, right? Which means that it's increasing. We have to contextualize what T means, and T is days after the drive began, right? So as T increases, V increases, and V is the number of people registered. So that means that by every day, the number of people registered increases, right? And if you look through the problem, you can see that A, the number of registered voters at the beginning of the registration, that's not it. The number of registered voters by the end of the registration drive, no, that's not it. And C isn't it either. D is the answer because it's the only one that changes. All of the other answer choices are describing things that are constant. However, you know that 65 is accompanied by a variable, so as time passes, T changes. Well, you made it to the end of the video. I hope this was useful. Please comment if you have any questions about anything. I'm more than happy to answer. And please make use of this. So I put a lot of work into it. So, yeah.